Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Edge. We're really happy to have Carlos Guerrero on the show with us today. It's been a little while since we've recorded, so it's great to be back again. John's flown solo for a little bit recently, and I've flown solo for a little bit because we've been really, really busy. But together, we're back again together, and maybe I'll give John an opportunity to say something today before he says anything. But Carlos, if you just want to start off like most people do and kind of give us a little bit of background about yourself, how you got started, how you got into the industry, and what you're doing today, and then we'll kind of go off on a few different tangents.
Sure, thanks, Jay, and Jay and John. Thanks for having me. It's super exciting to be here. So, how did I get here? I kind of come into this from a little bit of a different angle. Actually, for my education, I ended up going to art school. So I got a couple of art degrees. I got my bachelor's of fine arts, and then my master's of fine arts degree. And after the MFA experience. One of the things that I ended up doing after trying to, become a professor and a showing artist is ended up working at a nonprofit art center. And at that nonprofit art center, I started helping them raise money. I started helping them to secure corporate donations and those sort of things. And through doing that, I ended up in boardrooms. It was really fascinating. It was there in Lincoln, Nebraska. It's not a huge market, but it just became apparent that this could become something else. And so I started a business with some guys that ended up not working out. And then I joined an MSP there in Lincoln, Nebraska, moved to Florida, helped them build out their market down here. And then just through networking and that sort of thing, I ended up working at 360 Advanced, where I am now. We're an audit and compliance firm, about 100 people, located here in Tampa. But the thing that's kind of resonated with me, and then has sort of gone, come with me through the art days and into what I'm doing now, is I just really enjoy building things and being a part of building things. And I ended up being in, business development, and that's certainly a pretty creative venture. But what's been interesting to me, and I'd love to get your guys' feedback on this, it's really cool how, to be in the cyber security, compliance, all this space right now when everything's kind of evolving and changing, it sort of feels like there's a lot of creative people, there's a lot of tinkerers and builders that are all trying to sort this stuff out. And that's, kind of been where I've kind of seen things tie together.
I think that's an interesting point. So I want to get onto a little bit about what compliance is and what it means for our listeners in a bit.
Sure.
For me, for many years, my mum would ask me what I did for a job. And I say, I work in IT. And she's like, what does that mean? And it really meant early days that I looked after the odd desktop machine, because that's what it was back then. Then IT evolved into this world where it included many, many different areas of focus. And if somebody asked you in school, what do you want to do? And you said IT, you would say, do you mean storage, virtualization, networking, etc.? Cyber is very similar to that, right? And we're going to talk a bit about compliance, but you have red team, blue team, you have penetration testing, you have all these different areas of cyber. And I think one of the things I talk about a lot on this podcast, and when we talk to events, and when we were recently at Black Cat, cyber is a very friendly area, or at least for me. So I want to talk a little bit about that as well. But John, do you want to chip in a little bit before we talk about compliance?
Yeah, I think it's curious. You come from an art background, and I think that's interesting because it's a different way of thinking. A lot of people that come up in the cyber industry, the IT industry, either come from an engineering background, a computer science background, business. But I'm curious, how has the art background helped you in what you do today?
Well, I mean, I think, strictly from kind of a business development perspective, I mean, it's in my job, I mean, I own my own schedule, right? I mean, there's not like someone is not super prescriptive. So it's a bit like that blank canvas, and I have to go sort of build my business, within the business. But as it's been helpful in, talking and working with, cyber leaders, I feel like they're doing a lot of the same thing. I don't think there's a whole lot of difference. I mean, they're trying to basically, sort out a bunch of stuff. It's like the idea these days that security is even kind of a weird term, right? Because like we're protecting you from something. Well, yes, you sort of are, but because of the way that the enterprise has grown and sprawled, and we're trying to just sort of sort things out with where data is and how to, just basically manage the business. I mean, there's no blueprint for that either. And so it's kind of interesting. You find a lot of these same type of people trying to sort things out. And I can kind of relate. And I think it allows to have these, somewhat high level conversations just about, the nature of the business. And I found that to be helpful.
Yeah, I think the creative aspect is what I see come through with a lot of the people in security. Jay mentioned it's a very friendly industry, and a lot of people are attracted to it. And a lot of people are not coming from that traditional business area or IT area. They're coming from the outside and bringing new perspectives. We see it every day on LinkedIn. We see it with people, wanting to lean into this area. They could be military. They could be somebody working, 9-to-5 job in a restaurant, saying, "Hey, or a mom." But all these perspectives are what we need, because we can't keep doing the same thing that we've been doing in the past. And security is really pervasive throughout the business. So you need people with some new, fresh ideas of, how to apply, security within, logistics, or, it could be on a website, so on and so forth. So it's exciting to see these people with, again, a different perspective.
No, I think so too, John.
So let's pivot a little bit into compliance. So
sure,
it's a big topic, and I'm sure we could speak for more than a single podcast on compliance, but give us a brief kind of breakdown of what is compliance for our listeners. What is it? What does it mean? What does it encompass? And then we'll dig a little bit more deeper into it.
Well, I think historically, over the last, several years, we've relied on third-party risk management. We've relied on the marketplace to drive compliance. And so what you see a lot of times is, a business that is, typically maybe a software business is going to try to do business with a larger entity, and through their third-party risk management program, they say, well, in order to do that, you need to fill out the security questionnaire, or you need your SOC 2 or ISO 27001, and so on. And so so compliance kind of has become that sort of a business enabler. But I think what you're seeing, and what you're going to continue to see more and more, is because in the boardroom, businesses or leaders are just as interested in, truly managing risk, sure, but also limiting liability. I think, the check the box exercise of, okay, there's a piece of paper is become less and less valuable, but aligning with a framework and building your business around that framework, and where compliance just becomes an activity out of that, then all of a sudden, starts to have some teeth. And I think that's probably what you're going to see more and more. And, whether people like it or not, I mean, there's going to be more, regulation. And I'm really bullish on paying attention to CMMC in the States, because I think that that's really gaining some traction if you're paying attention behind the scenes. And I think there's going to be a ripple effect to that in terms of managing risk and supply chain and all those things. So I think it's an interesting time for compliance. I don't think that compliance is going to continue to sit in the seat of, we're just a pain in the ass type of thing, right? I think it's going to become just have a little bit more teeth for practical reasons, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I see compliance. I mean, obviously, me and John, our history is being customer side, is having
Sure.
to deal with those kind of meeting those certifications, being compliant, being audited.
Of course.
And you raised a little point about the checkbox kind of situation, and it was really difficult for me at times to get budget to do things I wanted to do,
Right.
Because if I could just check the box, the business would be like, but you've just checked the box. Why do you need to invest more? Like if you're saying you're doing all these things, and for me, just checking the box wasn't enough. I actually wanted to be secure. And that may sound a little bit odd because for me, a lot of these checkbox exercises aren't that. They would send in a bunch of auditors that wouldn't necessarily understand what we were doing. And they'd be like, do you have a virus check? And I'd be like, yes, tick. And I'm like, well, aren't you going to check whether I've actually deployed it? And is it on 100% of my machines? And where are the teeth? I guess I have a question before I pass over to John. Is there's a lot of ransomware attacks and a lot of people are still getting compromised and people are paying ransoms and it's making the news and all this stuff's going on. But there doesn't seem to be any form of punishment for saying you're compliant and then being found out that you're not. Do you think that's going to change? Do you think I've read some things recently that could potentially be changing? My concern is to shift it from being a box ticking exercise to actually making businesses secure. There's going to need to be some form of penalty if you're found out for not being secure, and you said you are. What do you think about that?
Jay, I actually think that's coming. I'm sorry to
No, it's okay, John.
break in here, but I'm going to throw you some softballs here. We're starting to see that. I mean, if you look at what New York DFS, the intent there and the reason why their second rewrite, or what they call Second Amendment, to their 500 standard was ransomware. It started from a ransomware event. And they're like, oh, shoot, we need to do something about this. And if you read the regulations, what they're putting in place, it talks about, risk-based authentication, having an inventory, that we also need to cover off not just our badged employees, but if we have affiliates. So we see that. Also, some of the stuff going on with California as well. SEC, SEC just announced they, hey, they're getting serious about security. And then if you have an event, you've got to report it within 4 days. What does that mean? We're still learning. But yeah, I'd love to hear your comments on that.
No, I think that's a great pivot. And yeah, the SEC ruling thing with the material, like a material breach and some of these things that folks are trying to sort out. So yes, everything is still a little bit fuzzy, like you mentioned, John. But what you made a point with the New York is it DFS? Is that right? That's right. Yeah, that you're mentioning states. We're mentioning things like CMMC. We're starting to mention, governments, and I people hate that. People hate regulation for a good reason. But the marketplace hasn't been able necessarily to sort it out through the SOC 2s and ISO 27001s and kind of doing it that way. So yeah, there's going to be some sticks out there with CMMC, for instance. Like those businesses have already attested that they're aligning with NIST 800-171, and they've been lying. And so CMMC is a way to go and validate that. And there's, in the government space, there's a false claims, the act. So like if people are lying, then they can be fined. And that's starting to happen. Very similar to how HIPAA back in the day was nothing. And now it's something. I mean, so those things are really starting to come into focus. And I think that's what you're going to see more of.
Do you think that there's too much compliance? And the reason I ask that is because I mean, I'm active on social media. I go to a lot of events. I talk to people, and they're different all over the globe, and it's like certain verticals need to meet certain compliances and pass certain things, and for people working in cyber, and certainly people in roles like yours that have to keep up with it, does it make it even more challenging or too challenging to have to constantly keep up with this ever-changing scenario? I mean, I did some work on CMMC when I was on the customer side, and then for whatever reason, CMMC kind of felt like it was stalling, and they were waiting, and maybe I think they were waiting for zero trust, which we'll get onto in a bit. But it was like, it's really, really hard to be compliant if it's changing so regularly, because businesses have to work against budgets and projects and deployments, and they have to get resources and all of those things. And if you're going to invest in what could be a 6-month, 12-month, 18-month project, and by the time you get to the end goal, the compliance that you're trying to meet is changed,
Of course.
that makes it really difficult, right?
It does make it really difficult. And I mean, so what the marketplace is provided us are all these various certifications or attestations or whatever they're called, for specific industries or specific regions. And so you would imagine that it would certainly be a lot easier if things were streamlined, right? And there was, a framework or a certification or something to kind of bring all that together. Because some of the clients we work with, you can imagine, we do their SOC 2, we do their ISO 27001, we do their PCI, we do their high trust. I mean, all the data centers do all of them, right? And for the most part, there's a lot of cross mapping, and they're all doing a lot of the same stuff. And so I think you're, to your point, Jay, that probably, hopefully, will be sorted out to some degree. And I'm thinking maybe the government stuff might be the way that has to work. I don't know for sure, but it's something that I certainly think about.
I think the problem that I had, I mean, I work for a large global manufacturer, and we used to have to do all the US regulation, all the English regulation, and then the rest of the European regulation. And then we had sites in China and Japan, and we had to deal with all of those. And quite a lot of them do overlap, and there are similarities. And we used to have a matrix which said if you could tick these 6 boxes, you covered these things as well.
Yeah.
But I mean, we needed a team of people to keep on top of it. And when it comes to security, you really don't want to, especially if you're going to start getting fined and there's going to be large numbers involved, or even kind of going to prison, etc., wherever it's going to go. I'm frightened that people are going to just avoid being in those roles, because if you're going to tie people down to committing and being accountable for something, but it's really too hard to be accountable, I can just see people going, I don't want to do it. We need to kind of simplify. That already. Yeah, I guess we are.
You are. And so, I mean, that's a whole nother topic. And that's when I mentioned you guys in the green room a little bit about, like, where does security sit within the organization, right? I think the position of the CISO is a really interesting one. And I've seen people write on it and talk about it, but it's, I've even seen people like post or write things about, has this position failed, right? Like, is security eventually going to sit within the organization, and those type of things. So I think folks are really trying to sort that out. I may have gone on a tangent a little bit, but the compliance thing can be a problem. But I guess the other question is, like, I mean, if it's completely unregulated, if no one's watching, if you have no way to show assurance, then what, you basically are depending on what?
Yeah, and I know that getting cyber insurance now is difficult unless you can prove you're compliant. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. I mean, for me, cybersecurity is a responsibility for the whole business. Yes, your CISO should possibly be driving strategy, depending on where they sit in the org, and we could get onto that as well. But it's a cultural shift. It is. Unless the whole business believe there's a reason to be secure and what the risks of not being secure are, then really putting the CISO out there on the front lines and saying, if you don't do this and we get compromised, you get fined or you go to prison and it risks your career, that's not really fair unless they are supported. John, what do you think?
I think it's a maturity thing. I mean, if you go back and you look at regulations around finance, the rise of the CFO, the regulations we have in terms of reporting for a public company, the way accounting is done, those were outgrowths of a manufacturing based economy. What we're seeing now is the rise of a digital network based economy, and I suspect what we'll see is a similar evolution of this role. And it's early days. Again, we talked about this briefly before we started recording, and we're seeing this evolution. Still very young, and IT in the past was really, a business function that lived within the four walls of the business. It didn't have the distributed nature that we're seeing today. The internet was not pervasive. It was basically, how do we account for things using these massive IBM computers, and then evolved, to include more and more of the business. But now that, we've essentially the business has to have IT to run it. And we now have apps and, employees that are now distributed. It has to change. Security has to be a real thing if we're going to be able to take advantage of, cloud and so on and so forth. And as a result, the role of security is going to evolve. And I think it's going to kind of take a similar path that what we did with accounting. But it's still early, and we're seeing that with government regulations.
I think when we talk about IT regulations in general, we had the ability, I think, and we've talked about this before, John, on podcasts and in person. We had the ability when we started our careers of being able to make mistakes. And if we made a mistake, it might be that one computer or those 5 computers, or if it was the ERP system, it might be 10 people. We could make those mistakes and learn as we went forward. And any regulation, if we didn't quite meet it, it didn't really have a huge effect. I think the problem we've got now is we're being attacked from every possible angle all of the time. The world's changed. Data and applications have moved out of that kind of protected perimeter. They're now out in the cloud. They're on people's devices. Devices are corporate owned or private or third parties. You have telephones and computers and all kinds of other devices you use to not only do private stuff, but stuff for corporations. And if you're a contractor, you might use your own machine. It never used to be like that. The world's completely different now than it was 5 or 10 years ago. And a open door for an attacker gives them access to almost everything. Whereas back in the day, you had a limited attack surface. But now we have global LANs or global WANs, MPLS, SD-WAN, everything's connected. If they manage to get through into one particular area, they could potentially create havoc and do create havoc in organizations. And I quite often have conversations with people and they say, we've never been compromised. And I always say, you never knew you were compromised, or you don't know whether you've been compromised. You can't sit there, hand on heart, and say, I've never been compromised.
No way.
Right? So that does bring me quite smoothly, I think, onto zero trust, right?
Sure.
It's having a knock-on effect with compliance. It's coming into regulations. The government in the US are talking about it. It's now in some regulations that are coming across the ocean to Europe, and it's obviously making its way across the globe. What do you think the effect is going to be, firstly, on security and secondly, on compliance?
Well, I think, as I'm certainly no zero trust expert, but as I understand and what I've paid attention to is that, it's the idea or the concept is more of a kind of a philosophy or a framework within itself, right? It's sort of a way of thinking as opposed to some sort of, technological solution, although we've seen, those, we do zero trust or something like that in the solution. So, I think the mindset of, well, let's just look at the landscape, the picture that you just painted, and you're exactly right. And the larger the organizations, the more legacy organizations, they're all having the same problem, right? Everyone is everywhere trying to connect to their network. The attack surface is so varied, and there's no visibility into a lot of it. So, the idea that you put some sort of initiative in place to have some visibility and reduce complexity and make sure you got an idea where everything is and who's logging into what. I mean, that seems to be, in some ways, a pretty simple notion that would hopefully, strengthen, your posture. And then, maybe you have to force some folks to go down this route, and that's where probably the compliance or the regulation stuff comes into. But that's just my kind of layman sort of take on the whole thing.
John, what do you think on the whole kind of compliance zero trust topic?
I think my thoughts here are pretty well known. Zero trust is coming. It's the framework that we need to move to. But again, we're early days into this journey, and it because of the nature of IT, and you mentioned it, earlier, Jay, that IT's evolved, and in the past we could make those mistakes because maybe it only impacted finance. Today, it's everywhere. IT is pervasive throughout the organization, and for it to be successful and for us to take advantage of the tools that are available to us, we need a mechanism to secure it, and one that doesn't continue to move at this pace of expensive depth, where we're just trying to find silver bullet solutions right and left, and putting them together in almost a chaotic way. We need to step back and have a strategy of how to secure the business. And that's what you're seeing as well coming from the government, the Biden executive order, some of the regulations that are starting to come at it from a state level. It seems to be kind of coalescing on this framework of zero trust, which makes a lot of sense. DFS 500, risk-based authentication, knowing that the state of your devices. Again, it harkens back to this concept of zero trust. But I think the challenge is trying to define that, what it looks like. How do you adopt it? Do you adopt it from a top down, or is it a bottom up? What are the inducements that makes a business have it to be successful? Because I think the challenge there is it's a massive project, and to keep focus on a project that, in a sense, the business sees it as, how is it returning value? How is it helping us generate revenue? Where's the numbers that are, we can show back to the board? I think that's going to be the challenge, is how do we keep our eye on the ball?
It's curious. Sorry, go on, Carlos.
No. Well, I was going to say that, we've been talking about compliance and check the box exercises and points in time, and how that, can not necessarily help anyone out. But I think if you think of compliance in terms of like a roadmap or a narrative or a story, right? There's building blocks, and where you can start to, John, you don't have to bite, that you don't have to eat the whole elephant type of thing, right? You can start making progress, and then you should be rewarded for showing progress. I mean, that's where sort of due diligence comes into play, right? And that's what I think people will ultimately, hopefully, be looking at and thinking of these frameworks as a way to not just to do it, but to start on the journey, so that eventually it's a living, breathing thing and a part of your organization. And if we're all doing similar things, that I think would be helpful too.
I think the problem that we've had when it comes to security is it was relatively straightforward to get budget for IT projects that you could prove that would make the business more efficient or make the business move forward, or if it was an ERP system needed an upgrade, or you needed the network be fast, or if you were moving to a new site, you needed switches, whatever it might be. Those were, you could sit down and you could see tangible benefits. When it comes to security, it was almost like smoke and mirrors, because the benefit was you weren't going to get hacked. So I had this conversation all the time when I sat down in board meetings, was I need X amount to move the business forward, but I need X amount to secure the business. And I would always be asked, but we've never been compromised, so why do you need to do anything? Well, that's not the point. Like, if I don't invest, we could get compromised. And they would always say, but we could not, we may not. So I'd rather spend money over here than here. So the problem is for many, many companies, we've ticked the box, going back to the ticks box. We've done enough to be able to tick the box and get compliant. We will spend the money on what helps the business move forward. But I think in today's world that we live in, all the people that are being compromised are the ones that tick the box and didn't invest. And don't get me wrong, a lot of companies maybe don't have the money to invest, or too small to invest, or don't have the resources. There are many, many reasons. And now they're trying to go on a journey. And we know the journey is going to take time. But equally, a lot of people know that the longer you take to do that journey, the more chance you've got of being compromised. So they're kind of scattergunning, just going and buying a load of tools and hoping that's enough. And I mean, we could talk about that for hours, but that's my concern is it needs to be a strategy. People need to go, where are the highest risks? Where are we got our weaknesses? Because you don't necessarily just deal with the highest risk. If the risk is you get compromised, okay, fine. What have we got that we would lose if we got compromised? It may not be for your business the biggest risk. So sit down and figure out where you should move forward as a business and secure that first. But I definitely see, and we've seen when we go to conferences, every vendor's just trying to sell you something. And if you're not smart, you'll buy stuff. It will only get implemented 10% of the, or nothing, and it will never work. John, I can see you're desperate to say something.
No, I was going to let Carlos talk.
Go for it, Carlos.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think, that, you make a really good point. And I think the notion of not getting breached, I mean, you hate to say the whole, it's not, if, but when. I think it's more complex and nuanced than that. But I think there's, a notion of, again, trying to move your business, forward, try to make your business better and try to reduce risk. And all of that's going to include, or it should include, a technology and a cyber strategy, interwoven into the whole big picture of thinking, right? But the idea that you're going to have a, castle and moat sort of, approach that is obviously, of a bygone era is, I mean, it's kind of an old-fashioned notion, I think, to some degree.
Okay, so I'd like to pivot a little bit and talk about networking. And I don't mean networking in the terms that John would talk about. I mean networking as in social media, LinkedIn, face-to-face. Because actually you posted a post recently about in-person events being really useful, right? So firstly, we met through a joint friend. We met through Simon Lindstead. We actually met face-to-face. We didn't get much opportunity because Simon was so important, or so many people wanted to see him that night. I stepped out and let other people kind of take some space, which was fine. I was more than happy to do that. But I also noticed that you post a lot on social media. You post a lot on LinkedIn. You really are trying to help people. I guess firstly, why are you trying to help people? And then my second question is going to be, why do you think in-person events mean so much?
Well, I think the why to network, or why to be active not only on LinkedIn but getting to know people. One, I think that back to sort of like how I came into this business through my creative days or art days into business. One of the things I discovered was that kind of connecting and building with people and relationships and kind of leading one thing to the other, it was kind of fun, but also it kind of had a knack at doing it. And I think that there's just a ton of value from expanding who and learning from people and all those sort of things. And if you're in the business of doing business or selling things like me, I mean, there's so much noise that's through people's emails or their DMs, that the only way to really have conversations with folks is to show a certain amount of legitimacy and a certain amount of care for the industry, so that hopefully you can have conversations with people what we would call super top of funnel, where they're, may not be buyers today, but maybe they're buyers tomorrow. But more importantly, they're leaders in the industry, and maybe they can introduce you to someone, and so on and so forth. So you just kind of, build it out that way. And I think it's useful for anyone who wants to grow their career, whether they're in sales or not.
Okay, so I'm active on LinkedIn. John's active on LinkedIn, but there is power in the face-to-face events.
There is.
I mean, as much as I love doing the podcast, I love having people on, I also like sharing a meal and having a good conversation. I mean, John talks about when we were at Black Cat, and I forget the name of the restaurant. What's the restaurant, John?
China Poblano.
So you shout that out a lot, so that's good.
I know.
Amazing meal in Vegas in a good restaurant. But for me, I talk a lot about the experience of that. We had a great conversation. We talked about people's home lives, families, There were some not confrontational conversations, but there was stuff that was quite intriguing and good to talk about. We talked about technology. For me, the pandemic meant I did hour after hour after hour of agenda-based meetings where it was no real hello, how are you, how's the family, any of that chit-chat, none of that relationship building, none of that bonding. And for me, the power of face-to-face events gives you more time. It may just be that on the way to walk into the restaurant or getting a coffee or whatever it might be, or you bump into, me and John bumped into people all over Vegas and we'd stop and have a chat and have a conversation. For me, that's really powerful. And like I said, that goes back to the cyber industry being really friendly. I get stopped when I'm walking across the show floor. John gets stopped. We stop people. We speak to people.
Yeah.
For me, that networking is about learning. I may be hitting 50 very soon, but I'm still learning every day. I learn from the people around me. I learn from social media. I learn from reading stuff. I learn from people pointing me at stuff. I learn values of morals. I learn about people. I learn about relationships. I learn about technology. And for me, those face-to-face events are really important. John, anything you want to add?
No, I think you nailed it on the head. It's the events that we've been to, Black Hat, RSA, so on and so forth. At the end of the day, a lot of great sessions, a lot of great content, a lot of great companies that you meet with. But it's the people, and that's really where I get my energy, as well as I learn a lot because I have the opportunity in a long form format to gain their perspective on different topics, cyber, life, those sorts of things. And there was a period of time in this decade that we missed out on that, and it's one of the reasons why we do this podcast is to have these conversations just in a different format. But that's the value for me is meeting those people on, learning their perspectives and helping me, reframe what I'm talking about in IT and security and networking. So that's what the value I get out of it.
Well, I think that what's starting to happen, which is super cool, is that we because of the pandemic, really it forced us into almost a fully digital way of communicating. But now on the other side of that, when we can start to get together, we have the rare opportunity now to blend those two together, and I think that can be extremely powerful. I mean, like, for instance, I made that post this morning, because I'm interested in doing what I do, growing my brand, promoting other people, connecting it all together, and hopefully, seeing where that goes. That's just one example of that. But if I look at the podcast thing, I have listened to a handful of podcasts pretty regularly, and I post about them so I can share that message. But what I've really gotten from that is that's how I've learned how to have these conversations, right? And I'd never necessarily be able to do that if I was, only confined to my physical space, right? And so I think there's a way to sort of blend them that is extremely powerful if you kind of know how to do that.
So I've just looked at the clock and time's ticking away. So before we get onto the fun questions, I want to ask you kind of one more question. And the question is, what would be your recommendation for somebody that wanted to get into cyber today? It doesn't matter what age they are, what background they've come from, because we've talked about those things don't matter. In fact, it's really good to have people from different backgrounds. But if there was one piece of advice you could offer, what would it be?
I'd say that find a way to do exactly what we just spoke about, which is networking, right? And so whether it's at the local events, which I think are pretty powerful still, of course, but don't hesitate to jump on LinkedIn. That seems to be where the professional folks are, and don't be afraid to share your opinions. Don't be afraid to start putting yourself out there, because wherever you are in your journey, there's always someone that's a couple steps behind you that you can help, and then there's obviously people ahead of you that you can start to connect with and will respect that you're putting yourself out there. So just do that.
I think that's really good advice. Okay, so one kind of fun question from me, and I'm going to ask you about food. It's going to be food related, like to an experience, because I
Yeah.
always used to ask what was the best meal you ever had. But for me,
Yeah.
as I've said before, a lot of the food experiences I've had have not necessarily been about the food, but have been about the company and the conversation. So
Of
what's been
course.
your best food experience and why?
Best food experience. I'll tell you about a, a food experience that I just remembered as you are telling me that. One, I don't have a lot of boundaries in terms of what I will eat, won't eat, so I'm pretty open-minded about that. And so my wife is Jamaican, and so we make some Jamaican food every so often, and she'll bring things to the table that that most people wouldn't have or I hadn't had. And then so let's put a pin in that. And then we have a friend that has a sustainable farm near here in Tampa. And when it came to turkey time, we always get an organic turkey. And he had he had these big turkey legs, right? Like the feet, right? And so we got like 5 or 6 of these frozen turkey feet and brought them home. And we just made the most incredible soup. And it was delicious and just incredible. And it just seemed like something that I don't know that a whole lot of people have had, turkey, foot soup. And I'm just, yeah, I don't know. I just thought of that as you, when you asked, that's what came to mind.
Well, you also mentioned when we were in the green room that you like pineapple on pizza. So I was a little bit nervous at asking you about
You
food,
almost
but
cut me out of this whole thing. I don't know if we almost didn't have this thing. I remember.
well, no, I didn't want, because you'd already said it off recording. I didn't really want to ask you again because look at John's smile. Look at the smile on his face. He's super happy that you like pineapple on pizza.
Dude,
And
you
I
can't
think
let
I
it go.
actually think he sends people Amazon vouchers in advance to get them to say it. But anyway, John, you ask your fun question.
Yeah, so Tampa, it's a place I enjoy visiting. Restaurants, any recommendations for an amazing meal that's kind of unique within the Tampa area?
Within the Tampa area, there's we really like this area near where we live called Safety Harbor, and so it's on the Pinellas
I
County
know this
side, and
area.
it's down there. And there's a little steakhouse there called Water Oak, and it's not super pretentious, but the food is really good. And we just always have just an incredible experience there. So that's what comes to mind, because that's where we are most recently. It's a little bit more than a steakhouse. It's a little different, but more importantly, I think as important as anything, it's in a cool little part of town that we like to support and we like to go to. So I think that probably adds to it as well.
Is there are there boats right next to that area?
Yeah.
Okay. I think I ate there at the last time I was there. So very good meal. So good recommendation.
Yeah, and then right next door to that, there's this place called the Tiki Tavern, which is kind of the bar that
Oh,
we like, and so that's we kind of go back and forth.
I missed out on the tiki. That would have been amazing.
Next time you're there you go, Tiki Tavern.
No, we're gonna
Yeah,
connect. You guys let me know when you're in town.
will
Oh, we
do.
will.
We like it here, and would be fun to hang out.
To be honest, it's been great having you on. Great insights as always. The time flew past, but it's been exceptional. Some real good insights into compliance and kind of the direction it's going to go. I'd love to have you back on in 6 months to talk about what's changed and how the world's changed. But I'd really like to thank you. It's been great.
I've just had a blast, guys. It's been so much fun getting to know you better and talking about this topic that we're passionate about.
Thank you.
Thank you.